Welcome, everybody. Pastor Tim Karskaten here on the Pipeline Report. Zach Karskaten will be joining me shortly. Today, we're going to be discussing the Supreme Court cases that just came down this weekend, especially the one concerning the birthright issue, as we saw that come down, dealing with judges across the nation who are dictating national policy. We'll get into that. There was also some other key cases that came down. I really believe we're at a moment where the Lord is beginning to nail things down biblically, and we're seeing victories across the land. We'll also be covering the victories that have been happening beyond the court cases, even in the economy, other issues, as well as we're seeing the warnings come into our nation about the sleeper cells. We're going to revisit some words that I think Cindy Jacobs had earlier this year and some dreams we've had. They're going to align with that. We're in a moment of pursuing. The Lord has spoken that because the enemy's on the run and we must pursue. Thanks for tuning in today. Get ready for the Pipeline Report. Well, welcome. We're so glad you're with us. We pray that you've had a good weekend and that the Lord has been faithful to you like he has been to us. We're excited about today's show as we're going to be covering some very important topics concerning what has happened this weekend. We're seeing President Trump and his policies, or what they're calling the Trump doctrine, is beginning to gain some momentum across the land. Obviously, the left is not happy about that, but they're having to admit, we may play a little clip of that early in a little while, of their having to admit that there are some major victories that are happening. Look, he's not doing everything perfect. We have a lot of issues that we're going to have to walk through in this next season. But right now, we're at a good momentum moment. The scripture the Lord gave me to go with that, and I'll talk about it tomorrow on my podcast, is out of 2 Samuel 5:24, where it says, "And it shall be when you hear the sound of the marching in the tops of the mulberry bushes or balsam trees," depending on translation, "then you shall act promptly, for then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines," or the army of our enemies. I believe we have a sound being released in the spirit that victory is imminent and we must pursue quickly. That's what that scripture says. And when you have the enemy on the run, it is no time to back off. That goes with the word we had a couple of weeks ago about how it's hammer time. And that term is used to talk about how the Lord is like a hammer and he crushes the enemy. But it's also in the vernacular, it's used for like race car drivers, that when they hammer time, they push the pedal down and they go as fast as they can, accelerate to overcome their opponents. I believe that's the moment we're at prophetically. The Lord has clearly spoken to me. Last week, I was shown some strongholds, some principalities that are at work, and then strategies on how to deal with it. You can go back and listen to my podcast about that last week. But today, here we are on this moment. And I think we need to explain a little bit about some of these policies that are coming about through the administration, but also how do we participate with God concerning these things? Because I can't say 100% of them are what the biblical standards would say, but obviously we're trying to bring peace into the earth and allow freedom for the people of our nation right now. This is our holiday week. July 4th is Friday, so we're going to celebrate Independence Day. Again, I think it's a very important one. Next year will be a big one because it'll be 26 from 1776 to 2026. But this is a big one too. I don't know in my lifetime, in 6 months, basically 5 months, a presidency has made so much ground, has brought about such drastic change in a nation in such a short period of time. The quagmire of Washington, D.C. has been dealt with at a new level for me, who's lobbied, and we lobby for policies and with our Congress and our senators. It takes years. Investigations have to happen. Committees have to go through. It's kind of like what you see sometimes in a church committees. Nothing gets done. You just talk a lot. Well, that happens in the government as well. And President Trump has decided that we don't have to operate that way. And I realize you risk making errors along the way. That's what the committees are for and investigations are for. I understand that. But as a redemptive ruler, which President Trump is, when you look at, I say redemptive ruler, he's a ruler, according to Romans chapter 12. One of the things a ruler does is he advances quickly, and there's carnage, is the word that can be used, which is created by advancing forward. And what Trump does, and people that are rulers like him, who have that gift, what they do is they move forward and then they deal with the carnage. In other words, they find out what happened and then they pick up the pieces and they resolve those problems. And that's hard for somebody who's a slow paced person, who wants to have all the red tape to assure that everything's perfect, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and all that. Well, what ends up happening in those cases, it gets so watered down, nothing ends up happening. Here's an example, and I'll shift to the bills here in just a second. I'll bring Zach in here. The immigration policies that we'll talk about in that court case on the birthright. The U.S. Agriculture Department announced that on our farms in America, especially these mega farms, these big farms, we have over almost 1 million illegal immigrants working our farms. I think it's 850,000 was the number the U.S. Agriculture Department reported. Well, that's a lot of people. And there's not a lot of Americans who want to do those hard labor jobs, because many of those are skilled in agriculture. And these illegal immigrants know how to do those jobs and are willing to do those jobs. You may be able to replace some of them, but you're not going to replace any of them. So that's going to affect our food production in America, obviously, our cattle industry, et cetera, et cetera. So President Trump announced, I think yesterday or today, that they're going to work with that, and they're not going to actually begin to deport those workers, that they're going to let them find a way that they can work legally. And his main goal was that they would pay taxes and be a part of the economic system of our nation. Now, that's going to deal with the farmers, because if you don't have workers that are paying taxes, that means you're not paying payroll taxes. And if you're an owner of a business in America, and we know this because we have employees here that work at our ministry, there's a 15% taken out of paychecks for Social Security, for Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. Well, an employer pays 8.5%, 8% of that, or 7.5% of that. And then the employee pays the other percent of that. They pay half. Well, in a farmer, that means he's going to have to kick in and pay his percentage. So that's why they like an illegal worker. Now, in the case of the meat market thing that they closed in Omaha, they had all these illegal workers working in there. The next day, they had a line outside of Americans lining up to work. So it just depends on the industry, how that's going to play out. But that's what brings us back to our birthright case. And we want to describe that. So, Zach, why don't you come on screen here and let's talk about this Supreme Court ruling. Basically, and I'm going to let him explain it. Basically, what we saw here was 5 rogue justices, 5 out of some 900 federal judges. There were 5 of them that were doing all these rulings against President Trump on immigration, deportation, birthright issues. Now, what they were doing, though, when their injunctions came about, it became nationwide injunctions. And that was never the intention of the federal judge's jurisdiction, the way it was written and the way they were put into office and into their judge seat. They're required, or they should have the authority to deal with cases that are before them. So if they're in Utah, they should be able to deal with the case in Utah, and it only applies to Utah. It doesn't apply to the whole nation. But the way it's been working, the lawfare of the left, because they can't pass legislation They use the court system to promote their legislation. And that court case that just went down the Supreme Court this weekend dealt with that issue. So why don't you give us an update on that, Zach, and where we are, and we'll play some clips of Bondi explaining to us what that actually means.
Yeah, you explained it pretty well there. And what's funny is going back to 2023, just so long ago, is Republican judges were doing the very same thing Democrat judges are doing now. In 2023, Judge Matthew Kaczmarek in I forget exactly where, but he ruled basically that he stopped the federal or the mail out abortion pill from going into effect. And so he kind of blocked that on an injunction. So even Republican judges will be hurt as well to an extent. But in reality, what this does is this stops these judges of these 5 districts, I think it's Virginia, Washington, D.C., and then like 3 in the Northwest, who are all kind of doing these injunctions. And what it'll do now is it'll basically go back to the original intent of the Constitution and make it a federalist system where if it's not clearly defined in the Constitution, then it goes down to the states, and that's where you have to stay. Now, if it goes up and forward, and the big case that brought this forward was the birthright citizens issue. And I want to play a clip of AG Pam Bondi when she was asked about this from a reporter on the press briefing over this weekend. And here is her response on this. And I think this is very key.
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Attorney General. So as you know, the Supreme Court did not rule on the underlying constitutionality of the president's birthright citizenship order. So what is the plan now? Are you going to try to implement the EO just in states where there isn't a legal challenge?
Yes, so birthright citizenship will be decided in October in the next session by the Supreme Court, unless it comes down in the next few minutes. I guess it could come down. I think they're still deliberating right now on some cases. As you heard, we just got transgender books, which is a huge win. But most likely, that will be decided in October in the next session. However,
raise your hand. Let the world see you. Sallallahu.
Case in Oregon, it will only affect the plaintiff in Oregon, not the entire country. So yes, it's indirectly, but that's pending.
So sorry, we were interrupted there.
Apologize for that.
What she's saying here is she's saying, look, this case that dealt with birthright citizenship was blocked in Oregon. And what the Supreme Court said is that judge in Oregon doesn't have the right to make a nationwide injunction that affects, the 49 other states. If they want to say no, birthright citizenship is legal, then okay, that applies to only Oregon, and it has to be taken up in each state. But what the Trump administration is going to do is there's another case going to come before the Supreme Court starting in this October that says, and Trump's argument is, and it would actually be found out in most of the original founding fathers' writings, which is that birthright citizenship was never the intent of the Constitution and of the founders. And so we need to go back to kind of creating some form of legal entry process and creating a tie to that. And the key issue here is that America is like the only, I think there's one other nation, I think somewhere in Africa, that does quote unquote birthright citizenship. Every other nation in the entire world goes through a requirement process where you have to create, a formal strategy process where you have to verify, you have family ties here. And if you're going to come here from another nation, that you're going to be able to produce an income, you're going to abide by the laws of the system. That's called assimilation. And anywhere throughout the country, in the world, more so, I should say, where you see this process not followed, is amazingly crime happens. You can go to Australia, to Africa, to Europe, to South America, in Japan, anywhere you look at where you go with these quote unquote open borders occurs, you see this disastrous policy. But she again continues on to play a little bit more of this clip where she was asked again kind of about this, and she reiterates it.
litigation, and we're waiting on that in the next term.
And how concerned are you that the Supreme Court will come back and determine that the executive order is unconstitutional?
Oh, we're very confident in the Supreme Court. But again, it's pending litigation, and that will directly be determined in October, but it indirectly impacts every case in this country, and we're thrilled with their decision today.
Okay, and so here what she's explaining is that the executive order that Trump administration put out is that basically saying birthright citizenship is illegal, and the goal of that was to test the system. They want an argument to be made. And a key thing about this, and this is just something that I think is key, is a lot of conservatives on the right and a lot of people are upset that Pam Bondi isn't doing what they thought that she should do, that Kash Patel isn't doing what they thought that they should be doing, and Dan Bongino and all these other people that President Trump put in office. The reason they're not doing the things that people want them to do is because they're doing things like this.
Yeah.
And then they're arresting, child sex traffickers and other things like that. If you saw that over the weekend down in South Florida, and so or Orlando area. And so these are the things that they're focusing on. Yes, we would like for them to be able to get there, but there's so many things that they have to get to. And Trump says it at the end of this press briefing. He's like, look, Pam Bondi's doing a great job of going before the Supreme Court, and so is her team, of actually making the arguments that need to be made. And the problem with the last administration, President Trump's last administration, and even his lawyers in the 2020 case, when they were coming before coming before judges, they were not arguing the cases that needed to be made. They were like in this, let's take this case, for example, the team that Trump had in the 2020 election cycle, the lawyers, the argument that they would be making on this case is that birthright citizenship is illegal. The argument right now on this case wasn't if birthright citizenship is illegal. It's whether the judges have the authority to make a nationwide injunction to stop the executive order. And in this instance, Pam Bondi did the right thing in saying the case is about the authority that these judges have or don't have, whether it's constitutional or not. And she argued it properly. So when we say, oh, it didn't go far enough, yes, that's kind of the point. And we want to be thankful that there is this long litigious process to a degree, because if not, then on the flip side, they'd be able to just say something and we'd have to deal with it. You would have a monarchy, you would have a dictatorship, totalitarian, all this other stuff. But because they're having to go through this slow, litigious, red tape process of undoing these things and clearly defining these things so we can have a precedent moving forward, now we're starting to see the benefits of why the founding fathers laid these things out and why it has to be. And that kind of goes for even the spending bill that we'll talk about here in a little bit.
And I think Justice Comey Barrett, Amy, really stepped up in this case. You never know. She's kind of a wild card as far as what's going to happen. But on this case, she came through very clearly. She wrote the opinion on the case. It was very strong. I read it. It's hard to understand because it's such legalese. But I pulled one quote I put on the Pipeline Report Facebook page. And she said this because activist judge, I call her activist Judge Jackson, was just screaming how this was wrong, and the Supreme Court is empowering the president to be an imperial executive and all this. And she makes a statement. But in her opinion, Amy Colbert writes, she said, Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive, speaking of President Trump, while embracing an imperial judiciary. And so what her point was is that Justice Jackson and, of course, Sotomayor and Kagan, all three of them agreed with it, is that here they are screaming that President Trump is being an imperialist and an emperor, whatever you want to call him, and yet they're willing to give that to the judges. They're giving them the same power that they say President Trump is walking in. And Amy Coney Barrett said, you can't do that. And her point was, regardless of what President Trump's doing, let's say and she didn't say this, but she implied it, that if he was doing that, it doesn't give us the right to do the same. And that we can't be imperialistic in the judiciary system. And really what this does, it seems from most analysts, is that this empowers executive office and Congress, not just President Trump. It puts everything back where it's supposed to be, that these rulings that these judges are making, that the Congress has a right to pass laws and institute it. They could pass a birthright law. They could actually put legislation forth and say, if you're born here, you have a right to citizenship. The very thing that these judges are trying to do, the Congress can do that. Now, Trump could veto it. I mean, you could have a lot of issues ago, but that's the legal path. That's how law is supposed to be run in America. And these judges that are across our country, and it's not a lot of them. I mean, most of those federal judges are good people. I'd say 90+% of them are good people doing the right thing. But this group right now is becoming activist judges, as Jackson is as well. Case in point, when she was being interviewed to be Supreme Court justice, the basic question, what is a woman? She couldn't answer that question or refused to answer that question, which meant she's on the transgender. She's unwilling to admit what biology says is the facts. So there's a case of an activist judge who's in office right now. And I think for the most part, what we're seeing here is a correction back to the way the Constitution is written and the way it should operate. And the executive office should have its power, Congress should have its power, and these judges do not have the right to intervene on that. And when you watch the pundits on the left, all they say is it's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. I mean, they literally. I watch many of them. Now they give no precedence. They don't quote anything in the Constitution to back up their statement. They just scream that all the time.
Yeah, and everybody has been somewhat upset, and it's been, if you don't understand the cases that have been before the Supreme Court on Amy Coney Barrett, of why she's seems like been ruling quote unquote against conservatives and against the Constitution, is because she's holding the standard, and this is, it can be somewhat, to be blunt, annoying to an extent, but she wants something that, if it comes through the Supreme Court, to be, lasting, a precedent that is set. And if the argument isn't made for your side and you're not making the right argument, she legally cannot and should not vote in favor of an opinion that she thinks should be right. So, and Justice Thomas has done this before. Like, they've all done it, where they'll do a better job of explaining the lawyer's case to the lawyer. You can go listen to several cases. I mean, it's very, very mind numbing. Excuse me. But sometimes they do a better job of explaining the case. And unfortunately, that happened in the first term with President Trump. And that happened several times with some of the lawyers President Trump has put forward. And so this goes back to the case of, look, people have been upset with Pam Bondi. She's doing the right job. And look, I have some qualms with her because when I was in Florida, she allowed some laws to go through and push forward that had to do with red flag laws. And I don't want to get in that. But right now, she's doing a fantastic job, and we have to give her credit where credit is due, where she's arguing the case before her. She's making sure that the case that she's going after is the one being argued, and legally the process is being followed. And for Amy Coney Barrett, we have to thank her for this, is following that same legal system and making sure that when this case has been put forward and passed, that it can't be overturned, because every I was dotted, every T was crossed, every punctuation and everything was exactly legally how it needed to be. And that can be very frustrating and very mind-numbing. But when it's done right, and now you have an equal weight system of getting back to that, you don't have things out of balance. And, we've been crying for justice. We want justice. We want justice. That's the cry of this generation. This is justice before us. This was justice before, when she ruled, quote unquote, against President Trump and against, quote unquote, the Constitution, is because the arguments that were being made by the lawyers who were making the arguments, what they were not doing the right job. And in this case, they did. And in a lot of these cases, they did. That's why you're seeing the rulings come down the way they did.
Okay, so even the CNN pundits and commentators are like shocked at how much the winning's going on. And there's a commentator, Smirkamish, I don't know how you say his name. Smirkamish is his way I see it spelled, but he made a whole 6-minute video, or I did on CNN, and just had to admit that Trump was on a roll and that a lot of his policies are working, being successful. One of the things he gave credit to, which I thought was really important, was, and the very thing that Zach alluded to, in his first term, he was a novice. He's a political novice, Trump was, and he brought political novices into the White House. and to work with him. And like Giuliani and some of these lawyers that he had, they were presenting cases in states that they didn't have precedents, they didn't have standing, and these things were being thrown out. And they had legitimate cases if they would have done them properly, but they didn't do them properly. And that's why his new chief of staff, I forget her name, is there. And she said the clown show at the White House is ending. And we're going to actually bring competent people in here who are going to be successful. And that is what is happening. And we got to give him grace in the sense that, again, he didn't know he trusted people who were saying the right things, but did not have the wherewithal to bring about these changes. I think Pam Bondi was an incredible hire. Mark Rubio was an incredible hire. On and on it goes. Everybody down the line. And these are loyalists to America. Number one, they're patriots. And then, of course, they're loyalists to the president. And again, it sounds like that they're just robotic at times. It does sound that way. But I tell you, and even Trump's even kidded that, you know, he's happy with their work now, but if they don't do good in the future, he could remove them. He did say things like that. But we're at a point right now where even the left is beginning to, even on the economic issues. Let me play this little clip from this commentator who talked about this, which was a really interesting take on it, as we hear where he's seeing the changes that are going about. So let me play this. Is it up there?
Be sure to share the tab that you
Raise
want.
your hand. Let the world see you.
Share the tab you want.
Hold on. Let me start over just a second here.
Share your screen and then share the tab you want.
Yeah.
Just do it here. It's fine.
Okay. Let me start over. I apologize. Okay. I can't get rid of that other video. Let me delete that one.
Raise your hand.
It's not the one I want. Hold on a sec. Just 1 minute here, and I'm going to get this up. I'm going to share the right one.
You might have to remove that.
Let me see. Is it popping up correctly there? There it is. Okay. Now let me play this one.
More reflective and respectful than usual of our allies.
They want to protect their country, and they need the United States. And without the United States, it's not going to be the same. And I left here differently. I left here saying that these people really love their countries. It's not a ripoff, and we're here to help them protect their country.
Back at home, Trump claimed that he's reached a trade deal with China and soon expects the same with India. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told Bloomberg that the deal was signed earlier this week. China's Commerce Ministry said Friday the two sides had further confirmed the details of the framework. Of course, Trump's initial imposition of tariffs wreaked havoc on American markets back in the spring. But now the markets have rebounded and grown. The S&P 500, NASDAQ hit record highs just yesterday. And it's not just the stock market. Inflation, the great economic fear of recent times, seems to be tamed. The rate is now reported at 2.4%, down from a high of 7% just 4 years ago. Meanwhile, blue-collar workers have seen real wage growth of 1.7% in Trump's first 5 months. This is the largest such increase in nearly 3 generations.
Did you hear what he just said there? I want you to take note of this. 3 generations. This is the massive shift we're talking about here. And now you're seeing the left is having to admit this, which is very important because we may start getting some patriotism even across the land, especially with moderates. He goes on to say, let me show a little bit more.
Notwithstanding its impact on our national debt, there's also hope among some that Trump's big, beautiful bill will give further financial relief to blue-collar workers, as well as create incentives to build more factories in the U.S. Some already see this happening. For instance, General Electric has just announced that it'll invest almost $500 million in moving production of washing machines from China to Kentucky. And then there's the border. Crossings have slowed to a trickle. According to CBP's May update, Southwest border encounters have fallen to about 282 a day, a drop of 93% from last year and the lowest since the early 1960s. Perhaps the loudest cheering for those border numbers is coming from America's Latino community, which might initially sound counterintuitive. On Thursday, Pew Research released an enormous data analysis of the 2024 election, which contains several surprises.
This is a very important take, what she's saying here, because the left say there was not a landslide, this was not an agenda, this was not a mandate by President Trump, but this just debunks that statement.
High on that list, President Trump won a bigger percentage of the Latino vote than previously believed. Hillary Clinton had a 38% lead over Trump among Hispanics in 2016. Joe Biden beat Trump in this demo by 25 percentage points. Kamala Harris's margin among these same voters over Trump, just 3 points. Even more surprising, perhaps, Pew Research concludes that if everyone had voted in 2024, contrary to the widely held belief that higher turnout helps Democrats, Trump would still have won. The data show 44% of non-voters said that they would have gone for Trump compared to 40% of non-voters who would have gone for Harris. So if more had voted, his margin would have grown. Yes.
Wow. You want to comment, Zach? These are some great stats he's putting out here.
Yeah, if you know any of the Hispanic community and my wife's family is that they really, and you go in South Florida, the Cubans who've come here legally, people who have done it right, they despise those who are coming across the border because they know, one, a lot of them, yes, they say they're coming here for welfare, but they need to do it right. They want them to do it right. And then there are those who've done it right, who've paid the price, who've taken them years, and don't get the rewards and benefits that people do when they go to California, et cetera, stuff like that. And so they want to stop this. They want the process of law and order to be in place. So this is kind of not a surprise. What is a surprise is the shift from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And I think one thing you got to see is something for Americans to pay attention to. And even if, you have friends who say have voted Democrat, still want to vote Democrat and watch CNN and all that stuff is you ask them a question of, look, if they're watching people and these people are getting mad at the benefits that is happening to the American people's pocketbook, it's like, these are the people who are saying they have a better alternative. Their better alternative is what? I mean, the best contrast is the previous administration versus this administration. And so it's like, okay, very clearly too, and this is the second go around of this. So it's like, okay, Trump might have done a one-hit wonder. No, the foundation of his policies and the worldview that he has is being able to establish something that is beneficial for all Americans. Yep. And thankfully, this last election, people got out in droves and voted enough to be able to stand against this. And it was because of shifts like these, not only in the Hispanic community, but in the Black community as well. That is what caused President Trump and this administration to get into power in this time.
Yesterday came a huge decision from the Supreme Court. The High Court declared that federal district judges exceeded their authority when issuing nationwide injunctions against Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. This will, of course, strengthen executive power both for Trump and for his successors. And finally, a Democratic socialist just won the nomination for mayor of New York City. And perhaps you're wondering, well, how does that affect Trump? It gives him the perfect foil, someone to play off in future political battles. This morning's New York Post references campaign literature for Zohran Mamdani, which advocates for increased taxation for, quote, richer and whiter neighborhoods. Just imagine what Trump will do with that. Winning became a punchline that Trump's opponents used to lampoon him in his first administration. He was a political novice then, surrounded by a team with which he was unfamiliar, and he was probably as surprised as the rest of us were that he won the election. This time is different. This time he came with a plan and a cabinet with senior advisors comprised of loyalists all well known to the president. And recently, he's exhibited a more layered approach to governing on both the domestic and international front, no longer solely guided by winning each day's news cycle. By any objective measure, President Trump has his opponents on the run.
Now that is exactly what Zach was saying there. about how he's making these decisions, and we're not trying to win each day's news cycle. That is huge, because what this case was, here we are. What's he doing about birthright? What's he doing about illegals with these judges? You know, and everybody's screaming, he's not stopping, he's not stopping. And he was just doing it on a layered way of procedure, which the commentator just said there, and he won the victory. This is what it is when it talks about in Exodus 23 that little by little you take the land, and that is what he's operating. It's a kingdom principle, and we're beginning to see it manifested through his policies, or what we call the Trump doctrine right now.
Yeah, and if we're going to shift to the New York case,
Yeah,
is
I do.
the proponent or the opponent, the socialist, Islamic socialist, who is coming into a position to be a finalist for the mayoral candidate, is he wants to increase. He's telling people, "I'm going to increase taxes up to 68% on top of what New York already pays." I mean, this is just going to crush people. Trump said it in his press briefing over the weekend. He's like, "How can people afford that? Like, you're talking about in a city where you can't survive, not being able to survive even more."
Yeah, and here's a comment. There's a movement in all the world called a global intifada, which is really a cry for radical Islam and radical advancement, and really empowering people to be violent. And so on Meet the Press yesterday, this mayoral candidate was asked to renounce that.
And here and now, do you condemn that phrase, globalize the intifada?
That's not language that I use. The language that I use and the language that I will continue to use to lead this city is that which speaks clearly to my intent, which is an intent grounded in a belief in universal human rights. And ultimately, that's what is the foundation of so much of my politics, the belief that...
Now, pause. He's a Muslim, and when he's slick, and this is why he's dangerous, because he's not screaming. He's not acting crazy on these shows right now. He's being articulate, but he's articulating a lie.
That freedom and justice and safety are things that, to have meaning, have to be applied to all people, and that includes Israelis and Palestinians alike.
But do you actually condemn it? I think that's the question and the outstanding issue that a number of people, both of the Jewish faith and beyond, have. Do you condemn that phase, globalize the intifada, which a lot of people hear as a call to violence against Jews?
I've heard from many Jewish New Yorkers who have shared their concerns with me, especially in light of the horrific attacks that we saw in Washington, D.C. and in Boulder, Colorado, about this moment of anti-Semitism in our country and in our city. And I've heard those fears, and I've had those conversations, and ultimately they are part and parcel of why in my campaign I've put forward a commitment to increase funding for anti-hate crime programming by 800%.
Now, when he says that anti-hate, this is really not an attack just for anti-Semitism. It's also for his issues, because he's going to get into it here in just a minute about all the protests at Columbia University and all these other Harvard, etc., for the pro-Palestinian movement and the pro-Hamas movement.
I don't believe that the role of the mayor is to police speech in the manner, especially
of
that of Donald Trump, who has put one New Yorker in jail who's just returned to his family, Mahmoud Khalil, for that very supposed crime of speech. Ultimately, what I think I need to show is the ability to not only talk about something, but to tackle it and to make clear that there's no room for anti-Semitism in this city. We have to root out that bigotry, and ultimately we do that through the actions, and that is the mayor I will be, one that protects Jewish New Yorkers and lives up to that commitment through the work that I do.
So he uses that example, and you understand that man that he's talking about there that was arrested was because he was inciting violence, free speech. Mandani says here, but this man was using free speech to entice violence, and which is the whole thing about the globalization of intifada. So he's avoiding the question, but he's also promoting his agenda, and it makes it sound like, if you're not listening carefully, oh, he's going to deal with anti-Semitism, he's going to stop all this hate speech. But what he's doing is empowering speech that actually promotes violence eventually.
Very quickly, for the people who care about the language and who feel really concerned by that phrase, why not just condemn it?
My concern is to start to walk down the line of language and making clear what language I believe is permissible or impermissible takes me into a place similar to that of the president who is looking to do those very kinds of things, putting people in jail for writing an op-ed, putting them in jail for protesting. Ultimately, it's not language that I use. It's
He's not done that. So that's misleading us.
language I understand there are concerns about. And what I will do is showcase my vision for the city through my words and my actions.
Through my words and my actions. He's promoting what he's saying there. There's a lot in that. And go ahead and comment on that, Zach.
Yeah, I want to go back to the beginning thing he said. He talked about universal rights. Being that he's a Muslim, the question to be is, what does he define as universal rights? She should have asked him that, gone in deeper. I mean, she did kind of a good job to an extent on the second question of kind of trying to hammer him home on the globalist intifada and talking about violence. What she was, because here's the thing is they're talking in two different worlds. She's talking about the violence from those who incite that and say that, violent jihadists. And he's not talking about that because he doesn't want to touch that. And then you see this a lot of times with politicians like this, is they're going to beat around the bush. They're going to talk about the non-violent Muslims, which there are a lot of, but it's the concern is the violent ones who are doing things like the protests at Columbia University, who are inciting violence, and in some cases have been violent themselves, and that's why they get arrested. If she were to have pressed harder and to actually have done her job, she should have asked him, well, what cases, who has President Trump arrested? Who has this? And then the op-ed case, what he's talking about is, well, did she incite violence? Did that person incite violence? Did that person really get arrested? Like, what is really going on? This is where you have to be, several layers deep, and hopefully somebody else can come back to him and ask him these questions. Obviously, like on the meeting of the press, they cover so many high level topics. They don't really dive deep into it. So I'll kind of give some benefit of the doubt there. But at the end of the day, when he talks about universal rights, the question is, well, what do you mean by that? Because at the end of the day, it's like, look, Jews and Muslims, they're not going to agree on the same thing of what would be quote unquote defined as universal. And when he says these things of justice and free care and free speech, is, look, as you said, look, you have a right to free speech, but you do not have a right to yell fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire. And this is even Republicans on the right, some of them candidates get this wrong, and he got it wrong just like they have as well.
And I wanted to play a clip from Cindy Jacobs. This is back in April, and it really goes because she had some prophecies also about Iran, but this was the warning that she gave back in April. And this man right here, Mandani, who globalist intifada, which he is promoting, he celebrated October 7. And what happened, it was a freedom for Palestine and all this kind of stuff. And she brought this warning, and we're starting to see it even now.
Word of the Lord for the nations. Do not think that the people who are protesting and calling for a Palestinian state are just protesting on behalf of Palestine. Whether they understand or not, there is an insurrection forming that is like unto the communist takeover in Russia for the downfall of the czars. Only this time, they are aiming for the nations of Canada, the U.S., and the nations of the world. Among the other nations, Europe is especially a target. This is a planned takeover, not only ideologically, but nationally. It has infiltrated militaries and is gaining strength. At the moment, they are quietly planning. There are proxies on the streets and protests. This is not only about bringing a Palestinian state to the Middle East, but an Islamic state to North America and other nations. They are subversive and even using misguided students, but the movement is on a much bigger and more pervasive scale. The insurrectionists are set in Paris, London, and other European cities, as well as in Australia and Latin America. However, the hand of God is waiting to cover those nations who are on their face in repentance and holiness. The word of the Lord for the nations.
There's the warning that she gave, which I think is a very important warning for us, because Mandani, in his rhetoric, is promoting the very thing that she had a warning for back in April. This is long before he won the primary. It's long before the war with Israel and Iran, which is creating this. And the Ayatollah and the imams out of Iran have now put out an intifada across the world to kill Trump and Netanyahu. They put out a hit on them and told radical intifada people to rise up and take them out. And this man is refusing to denounce that. Look, if New York gets him, it reminds me of Bob Jones' word. When you vote improperly, you receive the judgment of your voting. That would mean that New York is going to have to suffer judgment because of agreeing with this. Now, the problem is the candidacies in New York are not good. Cuomo says he's going to throw his hat back in the ring as an independent. You got Mayor Adams, who has had his problems as well. And then there's other people that are throwing their hats in the ring, all as independents. The Republican would not even have a shot anyway in New York City because of the demographics. So this is a mess. And the people that put him in, they found out the main people was the wealthy young people in New York City, the ones who promoted him and behind AOC's endorsement, et cetera. So these are people that doesn't make no sense. And one of the statements in that Meet the Press thing, they talked about billionaires, and he said, we don't need billionaires. We need equality, equity. And, you know, Trump called him a communist, and I guess that's not probably a true statement about him. He's a pure socialist and the purest form of it. But yeah, communism and socialism are very similar in a lot of ways. So you can't really totally divest yourself of saying he doesn't have communist ways. It's kind of like, a man says he's not henpecked, but he has chicken house ways. And he can say the same thing here. He says he's not communist, but he has communist ways about him. And that's a danger point for New York City. I can't even imagine what businesses will do if he gets any of his policies through. There's a thing, he may get into office and be, neutered. He may not have any ability to put his policies in place anyway. He wants to defund the police, put counselors out there, et cetera, all the crazy policies he has.
Yeah, what's interesting to see is President Trump's already warned him if he were to get in office and he doesn't do the right thing, he's going to lose federal funding. That's kind of how New York's really surviving right now because a lot of people have left. But then there's also the case of he might get elected because of all the illegals who are there who might vote for him. So that's this is a case study of one, where the state of the country is at, but then two, if he gets elected, will the voter rolls be able to be looked at to see who actually voted for him and how they voted for him, to see if it's actually New York citizens, New York residents, or who knows. So this is kind of a reaping what you sowed in the last season, and New Yorkers have to come to their senses to a degree and stand up to this or kind of fall under it. And going to Cindy's point of the border and the sleeper cells is, I mean, President Trump, even the Border Patrol have talked about the IRGC agents who they've known have leaked through, the ones who they've caught. Well, what about in the 12 to 20 plus million that have come through just in the last 4 years, but years before that, how many are already in this country? And we don't know about them. They've been sleeper cells for so long. So that's kind of the key question there, and something that is for high alert for pretty much every single state throughout the country, of trying to prevent these things. And being a church, we kind of see that, of warnings from local law officials of saying, hey, you need to be on alert. You need to, be aware of these things, as you've seen these kind of instances start to arise more and more throughout the country.
And she was on CBN, and she also had a warning there about the sleeper cells. We'll add this to what she just said.
Actually, that we need to pray against bombings, dirty bombs against certain cities in America.
And how do you encouraging people to pray?
Well, for exposure, that the intelligence services will be able to discover these and that they not go off. I really wrestled for days when this thought first came into my understanding. I just thought, no way, that cannot happen. And then, I just couldn't sleep. So then I thought, well, we probably would have said 9/11 could never happen. How could an airplane, take down buildings? How could it happen? And so I think that there is no activity being planned against the United States by terrorists is naivety. I checked this out with someone that is in the intelligence community, has been associated with the intelligence community, and immediately sent it back and said, send it. And I checked it out with some other prophets. So the warnings were specifically, I'm trying to remember, for San Diego, Los Angeles, Dallas, Washington, D.C., New York, and Baltimore. And so I say, let's not be in fear, but let's pray. And let's ask the Lord, stop this. Or if not a dirty bomb, any kind of bombings. We're in a very volatile time.
And that goes with the prophetic I was given. I told you all the dream I had about the bombing in Nashville. It happened the next day after my dream. And then I saw Hamas flyers being handed out, join the Hamas movement. And to me, that's the Free Palestine movement. So it has come about, and we're seeing this thing happen. And I'll say this. It just happened in New York City. I played this a little earlier by accident, but let me play this. This is in
Let
New
the
York
world
City.
see you. Sallallahu
As you can see, Hamas flags being waved. These are Muslims from all around the world in the streets of New York City doing their prayers. This has to do with an imam, somebody, one of their prophets, honoring him. And they're just let the whole world see it. This is what they're doing in our own streets and our own cities. So this is where Cindy's warning, the warning I have, is very active right now. And I think we need to be wise in this sense and realize that this is the world we live in. This is what started in Europe and now has taken over Europe. And we have a responsibility to pray. She named the cities there, you know, of the ones that we need to watch out for. So we do want to cover those cities. I don't know how to get that out of there, Zach. But if we that's not the one I want there. Hold on. Yeah, sorry guys. But we do want to pray for those cities, especially that there not be any dirty bombs, sleeper cells. Zach alluded to it. They have arrested quite a few Iranians. I think there's upwards of 6,000 of them that they have marked in the nation. That's a report I read. And now they're starting to arrest them. Their ties to the government. One was a sniper in their government, their army that's here as well. It doesn't mean they're the bad guys. They may have fled. I don't know. But I'm just telling you, this is what's happening in our nation, and we've got to cover in prayer. And we have prophetic warnings about it, so we want to adhere to those and pray accordingly. Okay. Anything else, Zach, before we close out today?
I know we're going to touch the voting on the bill. There's been a big appeal from the Democrats that I'm watching right now live. They've lost, so it looks like things are going to continue to move forward on this. And there's a bunch of, we talked about it before, there's a bunch of lies kind of going around from Democrats and even Republicans talking about things, Medicare is going to be taken away. And Mike Johnson has said, Speaker Johnson has said this numerous times of, yes, it will be taken away from those who are able-bodied and willing to work, or able to work and refuse to, and who sit in their mom's basement and play video games. Those are the people who are going to be kicked off of all these welfare programs and the illegals, et cetera, stuff like that, so that those who need it can actually get it and they don't lose funding for it, because there's becoming a problem of enough funds in the bank to be able to get it to those who actually need it. That's kind of the key there.
And he laid it out very well. Because it's a matter of semantics, because the left is saying there's cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, which the cuts are to remove the fraud, waste, and abuse. That's what the cuts are. And they're not saying that when the left speaks of that, and they're scaring people. You can imagine a poor person or a disabled person, and he's hearing from his constituents, from his politicians, that they're going to cut your funding. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to rally to that side because you want your funding, understandably. But that's not what's happening here. So we got to make sure we keep that narrative out there and pray accordingly to that narrative, that they would find the fraud, waste, and abuse, remove it, and then start supplying and funding Medicaid the way it should be funded for those that truly are in need. That's what it's for. And I think that God honors that when we do help these people that way. My mother, she died. She was on hospice. She didn't have any finances. She had nothing left to her name. and Medicaid kicked in and helped her while she was in hospice. And so and it was a reward to us, it was a blessing to us. But she was a legitimate case. She didn't have any funding whatsoever at the end of her life. So there are people out there like that we have to understand that it is a healthy thing for them.
And one last thing is if this bill isn't passed, everybody's taxes are going to start going up this next year. So it's like we have to consider this as a reality. I mean, this is the fault of the last administration.
Yep.
But this is kind of why they're doing this in an emergency case. And then coming up to the next budget bills that are coming up later this year. So this is very key. This is why this is important, because if this doesn't get passed, whether it's perfect or not, or right or wrong, is look, if this gets passed, taxes are going to go lower on everybody. And then if this doesn't get passed, the taxes are going to only increase because of what's already in the pipeline to come down for us and come next tax season. So
because these are the tax cuts from 2017 that Trump instituted, and they'll go away. They'll what we call sunset, and some middle class people will see a 68% increase in taxes. That's a lot of money, 68%. So I have to say that most Republicans are going to vote for this for that reason alone, because they do not want it on their record, especially in an election year, because that would slide into 2026 when everybody's having to pay more taxes, and their politician, the Republican politician, is the one who voted against the tax cuts and made that increase come upon them. So there's a lot of pressure there. So, well, thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the Pipeline Report. Sorry for the technical problems. That's my fault. And I was having some problems bringing up the right videos. But we do thank the Lord for his strength today. I pray for you on the Pipeline Report who stay with us and pray with us accordingly, and make sure that our nation stays the way God created it to be, and our original intent of who we are, that we get to walk that out according to what God created us to be. Well, bless you. We'll be back here next Monday. One of us will, at least, on this live stream. This is our sabbatical month here at our ministry, so we only do Sunday live services. We still do everything online. Wednesday nights will be online, and of course we'll be here online as well. All right, God bless you. We love you. We'll see you next week.